What if everything you believe about where the plague began is wrong? What if there was no single origin, no identifiable starting point carved into the map? What if the disease did not emerge from a place, but from a movement? What if the answer has never been hidden, only misunderstood? And what if, by the end of this journey, you realize the plague did not begin where history says it did, but where systems failed to see themselves? You stand in a quiet, climate-controlled archive somewhere in the United States, surrounded by glowing screens, digital reconstructions, and ancient maps. Thin lines stretch across continents, tracing routes that once pulsed with life. These are not simply trade paths or maritime corridors. They are invisible highways of exchange, carrying more than just goods. At first glance, the routes appear orderly, almost intentional, like veins in a vast global organism. But the more you study them, the more they begin to blur into something else, something restless, something that connects and disconnects with every shift. You zoom in. Ports flicker to life along the edges of Europe, North Africa, and Asia, like small breathing organisms. You can almost hear them. The low groan of wooden hulls pressing against docks, the rhythmic slap of water against barnacle-covered beams, chains dragging across cobbled stone. The air is thick with salt, sweat, and the faint, almost imperceptible stench of organic cargo that has traveled too far for too long. This is where you expect the story to begin. A port, a ship, a moment of arrival. But as you stare at the maps and consider the centuries of trade and exchange that have passed through these bustling harbors, something doesn't feel right. There's no obvious place of origin, no single event that marks the first spark of the plague. The more you look, the more this notion of origin slips through your fingers. It's as if this moment, the one where you expect the plague to begin, is just another point, along a much longer and more complex chain of events. Every ship you observe has already come from somewhere else, carrying with it the remnants of past journeys, grain from inland fields, fabrics woven in distant regions, spices that crossed deserts long before they reached the sea. These materials, once fresh and new, are now just a part of the cycle, reabsorbed into the flow of commerce. But beneath this visible, observable exchange, there is something else moving, something smaller, something unnoticed. And there, beneath the human bustle, the answer begins to take shape. You're not looking at the start of a disease. You are looking at the movement of a system of exchange, of trade, of travel, of hidden carriers moving undetected. A system that operates without oversight, without a clear beginning or an obvious destination. As you shift your focus to the ships themselves, you realize that they are not simply transporting goods. They are transporting life. And some of that, life is far from benign. Small creatures, unseen, unnoticed, travel along with the goods. Rats, fleas, microbes. They move freely between the planks of the ship, between the crates and the cargo, unnoticed in the chaos of loading and unloading. But their movement is not random. These creatures are hitching a ride carried by the flow of commerce, spreading across vast distances without detection. And so it begins to dawn on you. The plague did not have a single origin. It was not an event that exploded from one city, one harbor, one market. It was a process, a series of interconnected movements, each one seemingly insignificant in isolation, but together they form a vast, invisible network. This network spanned across continents, silently transporting not just goods but disease. The ships, despite their efficiency, are not carrying the plague consciously. They are merely following their routes, fulfilling their purpose. But the unseen creatures, those tiny pests, know no boundaries. They don't care about human trade agreements or the schedules of merchants. They move with the natural rhythms of the world, and in doing so, they follow the same routes as the merchants, the traders, the travelers. There is no clean line between what is controlled and what is not. Ships dock and depart. Their cargo is unloaded, but always underneath the surface the pestilence moves, undetected, invisible. You realize now that the system, the global trade network, was not only efficient but blind. It moved with purpose, but it was unaware of the damage it was silently transporting. And that is what makes it so dangerous. The plague doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with a loud crash, with a dramatic declaration. It enters through the cracks in the system, unnoticed, undisturbed, blending in with the regular hum of human activity. It takes advantage of the very structures humans have put in place to facilitate their trade, their exploration, their ambition. It moves through these structures, unnoticed by those who are too focused on the goods they are receiving and sending, to see the unseen threat growing within. The more you zoom out, the more this interconnected web becomes clear. What seemed like isolated regions, Europe, Africa, Asia, are now part of a single continuous flow. Trade routes crisscross oceans, linking cities, binding distant populations together in a network that spans the entire globe. You can see it now. There is no isolated point of failure. There is no single city where the plague began. Instead, you see a global system, an organism that allowed the disease to spread freely, silently, across vast distances. The answer is not where the plague began. The question is how it was allowed to move so freely, undetected, slipping through the cracks in the system. The origin is not a place you can circle on a map. It is a condition, a set of circumstances that allowed disease to travel undisturbed. A system that allowed movement without awareness. As you stand there watching these ancient roots glow across modern screens, you feel the weight of realization settle in. What you've been looking for, an isolated event, a starting point, doesn't exist. The plague did not come from one place. It came from a failure of perception. It was never hidden in the corners of a port or a single market. It was hidden in plain sight, carried along by a system that was too efficient, too expansive, and too blind to notice what it was carrying. This was never chaos. It was function. It was the operation of a system working exactly as it was designed to. Efficient, expansive, and blind to what it carried within. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel because here you begin to see what has always been right in front of you, but was never truly seen. You're no longer looking at the vast, interconnected systems of global trade. Instead, you descend into a quieter, more insidious world. One that operates below the surface, invisible to the human eye. Here, the carriers of the plague are not ships or ports. They are smaller, more subtle creatures, fleas, rats, and bacteria. These are the real agents of infection, and their story is one of survival, of biological and environmental efficiency. You feel the temperature shift as you enter the dark, damp underbelly of a cargo ship. The air is thick and musty, heavy with the smell of mildew, salt, and sweat. There's little light here, only the faint glow of lanterns, casting long shadows on the wooden beams. The atmosphere is oppressive, the air close, the temperature stifling. This is where the real journey begins, below deck, hidden in the cracks and crevices that humans rarely inspect. It's in this cramped, dark space that the tiny carriers of the plague thrive unnoticed. The rats scurry across the floor, their tiny claws clicking against the wood. They move in and out of the shadows, unbothered by the humans above, who are far too busy with their cargo to notice what's happening below. The rats carry with them fleas, tiny, almost imperceptible creatures that jump from host to host without warning. The fleas latch onto the rats as they scavenge for food, moving with them from port to port, from ship to ship. The rats, though much larger than their passengers, are just as unaware of the danger they carry. The fleas don't care about the rats' destination. They care only about survival. As you follow these creatures through the dark passageways of the ship, you realize that the flea is a perfect vector, small, resilient, hidden in plain sight. It doesn't need much to thrive. A warm body, a steady food supply, and crucially, a place to hitch a ride. For the fleas, the rats are nothing more than a moving platform, carrying them across the seas, through the markets, into the densest urban areas. The rats do not spread the disease intentionally. They are simply part of the system. And in that system, the fleas are the true agents of the plague. Imagine the rats disembarking at a busy port, carrying their unseen passengers into the crowded marketplaces, where goods are exchanged and people bustle about. The warmth of the crowded streets is irresistible to the fleas. They jump from one host to another, burrowing into the clothing, the skin of unsuspecting humans, It doesn't matter that the human has no idea what's happening. The flea does its job quietly, efficiently, moving between people, infecting them without their knowledge. From there, the cycle continues. The infected humans carry the bacteria with them, on their clothes, in their blood. They spread it in the marketplaces, in the homes they return to, in the very air they breathe. The bacteria multiply, taking hold in the lymph nodes, creating painful, swollen boils. It's not just the human body that's infected, it's the very systems in which they live, the cities, the families, the entire networks of human existence. The environmental conditions are perfect for the plague to spread. The rats, the fleas, the bacteria, they all function in harmony within their ecosystems. The fleas need the rats to survive, and the rats need the crowded urban environments to find food. The cities, with their dense populations and unsanitary conditions, provide the perfect breeding grounds for the disease. And once it's there, once the fleas have jumped from rat to human to human, the plague spreads with terrifying speed. You begin to understand that the plague did not spread by chance. It didn't simply travel from one place to another randomly. No, the spread followed predictable patterns. The fleas and rats were not just mindless creatures. They were part of an intricate system, a system that was perfectly designed for the plague to thrive. The rats' movement through the urban environments, their migration from one port to another, followed patterns that allowed the disease to spread across vast distances. The bacteria's ability to survive in the body to infect the lymphatic system was perfectly suited to the environments it found itself in. You realize as you watch the rats moving from port to port, how this system worked with a logic all its own. The rats, the fleas, the bacteria, they were not just random elements. They were perfectly adapted to their environment. Each one played a role in the spread of the disease. The fleas didn't need to be large or fast. They only needed to be small enough to stay unnoticed, to survive on their hosts, to move through the crowds undetected. The rats too didn't need to be fast or efficient. They just needed to move through the human world with regularity, carrying with them the tiny but devastating vectors of the disease. The plague was not an accident. It was not some random event that struck without reason. No, the plague was a result of the environment, of ecosystems designed to allow these tiny carriers to thrive. It was a perfect storm of biological and environmental factors that made the plague inevitable. Once these factors were in place, once the fleas had access to human hosts, the spread of the disease was as inevitable as the movement of the rats themselves. The heat of the air around you is palpable now. The movement of the rats, the swarming of the fleas, the infection spreading through the body, everything feels alive with the constant motion of unseen forces. You can almost feel the tension in the air as the plague begins its silent work. It moves through the dark crevices of the world, moving from ship to port to market to city, traveling through time and space unnoticed until it finally breaks out into the open. And by the time it's visible, it's already too late. This was never random. This was never a mistake. This was the result of a perfect system, one that was blind to its own dangers, one that allowed disease to spread without ever realizing it. Have you ever wondered how small things can have such a big impact? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. How did the tiny creatures that carried the plague change the world forever? The bustling streets of a medieval city are teeming with life. People shuffle along narrow roads, crammed side by side, as if there were no other way to live. The air is thick with the sound of merchants shouting, the clatter of carts and the smell of human sweat mingling with the distinct stench of waste. You move through these streets, the pavement slick with mud, as the city itself seems to pulse, with activity, alive, energetic, but strangely suffocating. But beneath this illusion of stability, cracks are forming, small fractures that no one notices at first. The streets are narrow, overcrowded, and poorly lit. Waste, both human and animal, accumulates in corners, spilling into alleys, piling up in front of homes and shops. The air, once fresh with the promise of a busy market day, now carries a stale, rancid odor. The proximity of bodies, the constant contact of skin against skin, creates an environment of tension, where one wrong move can spark something much larger than any individual. People live on top of one another, not just physically, but in a system that demands proximity. Proximity for survival, for trade, for the basic act of existing in these tightly packed spaces. You walk through a market. The food is piled high, fresh and vibrant, but beneath the surface you begin to see the patterns that led to the spread of the plague. The same people who shop here, who handle this produce, are the same people who are carrying the fleas, the bacteria, the disease. The rats scurry beneath your feet, unnoticed by those too distracted by the goods they're buying. Their presence is ignored, accepted as part of the normal course of life in the city. The system, designed to facilitate the movement of goods and people, has failed to account for the hidden dangers beneath. As you move deeper into the heart of the city, you begin to notice more subtle signs of decay. Roads once lined with buildings and shops now show signs of disrepair. Roofs sag, walls lean precariously, and windows are shattered. The sewage system is non-existent, leaving the streets to become open sewers, festering with disease. The more you observe, the more you realize that this is not an isolated problem. This is not a breakdown of a single person or a single institution. It is the consequence of a much larger failure. The failure of the society itself. These small flaws, these ignored weaknesses, have created a perfect environment for disease to thrive. There is no plan, no method to prevent the spread of infection. The city's infrastructure is built to be efficient, to move people and goods, but it was not designed with health or sanitation in mind. It was designed to facilitate life, not to protect it. The health of the people has been an afterthought. The lack of clean water, the piles of waste, the lack of basic medical knowledge, all of these factors have combined to create the perfect breeding ground for the plague. People live in crowded conditions, their immune systems already weakened by poor diets, unsanitary living spaces, and the constant pressure of surviving in a city that demands so much but provides so little. The plague is not a sudden event. It is the result of years of neglect, of systems that were never designed to account for what happens when everything breaks down. You realize that nothing in this city was truly stable. What seemed like the normal hum of everyday life, the market, the bustling crowds, the energy of the streets was in fact an illusion. It was a fragile shell that, when broken, would reveal the true state of things, a system on the brink of collapse. The city's social and structural foundations were too weak to withstand the pressure of the disease. What appeared to be a stable, functioning society was actually an accident waiting to happen. And when the plague arrived, it swept through these fragile structures, tearing apart everything in its path. The silence is deafening now as you walk through the deserted streets, imagining what came after. You can hear the echo of your footsteps, but there is no one around. The market is empty. The shops are shuttered. The streets once full of life are now silent still. The collapse has begun. People are sick, dying, unable to leave their homes, too weak to fight back against the disease that has taken root in their bodies. The rats, the fleas, the bacteria. Now they have a free rein to spread across the city, moving from one infected body to the next, unchecked, unopposed. This is the true cause of the plague's rapid spread. It wasn't just the rats, it wasn't just the fleas, it was the system itself, a society that had failed to address the fundamental issues of sanitation, overcrowding, and health. The plague spread not because it was a sudden random event, but because it was inevitable. The conditions were already in place. The people, living in close quarters, were the perfect targets. The rats and fleas already existing within the city's ecosystem had nowhere to go but into the bodies of the people they lived alongside. The bacteria found the perfect environment to thrive, and once it took hold, there was nothing to stop it from spreading. This collapse wasn't sudden, it was a slow burn, a buildup of years of neglect. The infrastructure failed, the systems crumbled, and the disease spread, unstoppable, unchallenged, until it consumed the city. It's a reminder that even the most stable-looking societies can fall apart when the systems they depend on are weak, when small flaws are ignored for too long, and when the infrastructure built to support them isn't designed to keep them healthy. What would you have done if you had been there? If you had been part of this society, would you have seen the cracks before they split everything apart? Would you have recognized the danger, or would you have continued on, moving through the streets, oblivious to the consequences of living in such a fragile system? If this story resonates with you, give us a like. Share your thoughts on the fragile balance between stability and collapse. How do we ensure our own systems don't fail? You've walked through the streets of medieval cities, through the dark, cramped spaces below ships, and through the decaying systems of human society. You've seen the rats, the fleas, and the disease, but now you pause, and you find yourself back in the present. The noise of the past fades into silence, and the weight of history settles in your mind, heavy, unyielding. The plague, once seen as a disease, a sudden catastrophe, now takes on a deeper, more symbolic meaning. It's not just the disease itself that matters anymore. It's the system that allowed it to spread, the systems that failed to see what was right in front of them. You stand in a quiet room, surrounded by the modern world, the clean, organized streets, the controlled environments, the advances in technology and medicine. There's a strange stillness in the air now, a silence that presses against you. It's no longer the clamor of medieval markets or the scurrying of rats. This silence feels different, unsettling. You are aware of the knowledge accumulated over centuries, the maps, the discoveries, the scientific advancements, but even with all this knowledge, you can't help but feel a sense of unease. As you look around, the connection between past and present becomes clearer. The patterns you saw in medieval Europe, the overcrowded cities, the unsanitary conditions, the failure of systems to account for hidden dangers, are not just relics of the past. They echo in the systems of today. In our cities, our infrastructure, our technology, we have created systems that are more complex than ever before. We have designed our world with incredible precision, yet much like those ancient cities, we have created structures that are blind to their own vulnerabilities. The question that once seemed so simple, what caused the plague, now shifts. It becomes something more personal, something more urgent. What is still invisible in our systems today, waiting to reveal itself too late. You realize now that the plague was not an isolated event. It wasn't just an outbreak of disease. It was a consequence of systems that were disconnected from the reality of the environment they operated within. The medieval city was blind to the dangers it fostered, the failure of its infrastructure, the fragility of its society. And in the modern world, we too live within systems of technology, of medicine, of trade, of politics, that often fail to see the invisible forces that threaten us. We're so focused on the tangible, the immediate, the visible, that we fail to see the cracks beneath the surface. There's a moment when you begin to feel the weight of this realization. The modern world, with all its advancements, is not as stable as it seems. We live in a world that is interconnected, where problems in one part of the world ripple through, affecting us all. The same patterns that led to the spread of the plague, overcrowding, environmental degradation, unsustainable systems, are still present in the way we live today. We build cities with the same blindness to their weaknesses. We create systems without fully understanding how they interact with the world around them. The more you think about it, the more you see how much of the past has been forgotten, or worse, ignored until it's too late. The scale of what you're realizing begins to feel immense. You step back from the immediate moment and consider the long view, the broad landscape. What you saw as isolated events, as one moment of history, now appear as part of an ongoing process. The plague was just one manifestation of a larger truth. Systems, human-made systems, are inherently vulnerable. They are built on assumptions, on the belief that we can control everything, that we can predict every outcome. But the reality is that systems are always at risk of breaking down, of collapsing in on themselves when we least expect it. You stand there, in the present, and reflect on how this knowledge feels both empowering and terrifying. We have learned so much from the past, from the mistakes of those who came before us, and yet, despite all that knowledge, we continue to build systems that are disconnected from the environment they operate in. What we, have learned from the plague is that even the most stable-looking systems can be fragile. The disease wasn't an accident. It was a consequence of the failure to see the bigger picture, the failure to account for all the invisible factors at play. And this same failure can happen again, now in our time. As the silence deepens, the weight of this understanding settles in. You realize that the true cause of the plague was not the disease itself. It was the system that allowed the disease to spread. Unchecked, the system that failed to account for the invisible forces working beneath the surface. And that system, no matter how advanced, no matter how modern, remains vulnerable. In the past, it was rats and fleas. In the present, it could be something else. An ecological collapse, a pandemic, a failure of infrastructure. What we have learned is that systems, no matter how advanced, must always be aware of their vulnerabilities. They must be connected to the realities they shape, to the forces they influence, and to the world they inhabit. The final question lingers in the air unanswered. What are we still not seeing today? What invisible forces are working beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when we, too, will be blind to the dangers we have created? The collapse of medieval systems was inevitable because they were blind to the hidden forces that shaped them. The collapse of modern systems may be inevitable too, unless we learn to see the invisible before it's too late. Here's where you are left standing. The knowledge is heavy. The past and the present are interconnected, and the invisible forces that shaped history still shape our world today. We have the power to see what others missed, but only if we choose to look beyond the surface, to question the systems we have built and the assumptions we take for granted. If this story made you think, take a moment to reflect and like this video. What invisible forces do you see in the world today? What systems need to be re-examined before it's too late? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.